Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Adrienne Edwards, Inglespire Family Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs here at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Tonight, we're in the midst of several award-winning, prize-winning, best-selling, world-renowned folks who have convened to celebrate the brilliant and generous Dr. Elizabeth Alexander's newest book, The Trayvon Generation. We are thrilled to present tonight's program with the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands, Arizona State University School of Humanities. When Natalie Diaz called, another one with a lot of accolades, to ask if the Whitney might want to partner on this program, the response was a resounding yes. Thank you to Natalie, my colleagues Megan Hoyer, Andy Hawks, and Alex Zilka, as well as Sarah Ortiz for bringing this event to fruition, and to our director, Adam Weinberg, and Senior Deputy Director, Scott Rothkopf, for their support. Dr. Alexander has thought and written poignantly and movingly about the precarity and profundity of Black life in the United States for her entire career. Following the extrajudicial murder of George Floyd in June 2020, she wrote a moving article in The New Yorker that she expanded into the book we are gathered here to discuss today. In 1994, she simultaneously published the essay, Can You Be Back and Look at This? Reading the Rodney King videos, in the academic journal Public Culture, and in the catalog for the great Thelma Golden's seminal exhibition, Black Male Representations and Masculinity in Contemporary American Art, which was here at the Whitney Museum. One of the important things Dr. Alexander discussed in the now nearly 30 years old text, which she also takes up in Trayvon Generation, is the matter of recording and the modes of dissemination through which images of violence towards Black life circulate, as being deeply embedded in the range of visual and textual languages in the United States. She has said, quote, Black bodies in pain for public consumption, end quote, have been an American national spectacle for centuries. But what are the effects of this conundrum of being unable to bear to think about something which is always present to my mind, as she put it in the King essay? She has traced the strange proclivity to revel in Black death from slave narratives to the murder of Emmett Till, to lynching postcards, photographs, parties, which she incisively described their intent as object lessons. She reflected in an interview in the New York Times that, quote, seeing is important and helps you understand, but I think the repetition of that image without thought to who's watching it and how it affects them is something that we could work on a little bit, end quote. If, as Dr. Alexander has it, quote, artists can dream another world, artists can write a different ending, end quote, how might they attend to such a devastating archive and repertoire of spectacles? How are we to contend with these matters, which she notes is, quote, primarily racially determined, end quote, without losing sight of and feeling and understanding for the ways in which they are compounded by region, class, gender, and sexuality? What role does the imagination have in constellating what Hortense Spillers calls the hieroglyphics of the flesh on the one hand, and June Jordan named the Black Archive on the other? For Dr. Alexander, art and history are indelible. They outlive flesh. We vision, we discard, we invent, we do it in the dark, end quote. Dr. Alexander is a prize-winning and New York Times bestselling author, renowned poet, educator, scholar, and cultural advocate. Her most recent book, The Trayvon Generation, is a galvanizing meditation on the power of art and culture to illuminate America's unresolved problem with race and the challenges facing Black America. Among the 15 books she has authored or co-authored, her memoir, The Light of the World, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Biography and the National Book Critics Circle Award in 2015. And her poetry collection, American Sublime, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry in 2006. Notably, Dr. Alexander composed and recited Praise Song for the Day for President Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration, Over the course of an esteemed career in education, she has held distinguished professorships at Smith College, Columbia University, Yale University, where she taught for 15 years and chaired the African American Studies Department. Dr. Alexander is president of the Mellon Foundation, the nation's largest funder in arts, culture, and humanities. During our program, Julie Mehretu and Jacqueline Woodson will join Dr. Alexander on stage for a conversation. Julie Mehretu is a world-renowned painter who lives and works in New York City. She is the recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Award in 2005 and the U.S. Department of State Medal of Arts Award in 2015. Mehretu's mid-career survey was presented at the Whitney in 2021. Jacqueline Woodson is the award-winning author of many books for young people and adults. She received a 2020 MacArthur Fellowship and a 2020 Hans Christian Andersen Award. Her memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming, was a National Book Award winner, and her novels for adults include Red at the Bone and Another Brooklyn. Before they come up, we'll first have remarks and readings from Mitchell Jackson and Reginald Dwayne Betts. Reginald Dwayne Betts is a 2021 MacArthur Fellow, award-winning author, poet, lawyer, and outspoken advocate for criminal justice reform. Mitchell Jackson is the author of the memoir Survival Math and the novel The Residue Years. His honors include a Pulitzer Prize and National Magazine Award. He is currently the John O. Whiteman Dean's Distinguished Professor in the Creative Writing Department of Arizona State University. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mitchell, who will kick things off.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Listening to these distinguished biographies is something really special. I'm very, very excited to be in all your company and honored to be here to celebrate this tremendous work. Last week, I was in Bradley International Airport. No sooner than I got through security, I recalled dashing through it years ago to make my daughter's very last father-daughter dance. By grace, I made it. Among the great boons of that night was watching my daughter and her friends do the nay-nay and all kind of other new dances, do them with laughs and smiles and cheers, with pure, unpretentious exuberance. It reminded me of the best dances of my youth, the days when I used to tell the not-so-white lie that I was related to Michael Jackson. When I was itching to flaunt my superior kid and play my WAP, my troop, my running man with cool faces. Which brings me to the following beautiful passage in Liz's book. Quote, I think of Frederick Douglass's words upon hearing slaves singing their sorrow songs in the fields. He laid waste to the nascent myth of the happy darky. Slaves sing most when they are most unhappy. Our dancing is our pleasure, but perhaps it is also our sorrow song. My sons love to dance. I have raised them to young adulthood. They are beautiful, they are funny, they are strong, they are fascinating, they are kind, they are joyful in friendship and community. They are righteous and smart in their politics. They are learning. They are loving. They are mighty and alive. She goes on to write, yes, I'm saying I measure my success as a mother of Black boys in part by the fact that I have sons who love to dance, who dance in community, who dance till their powerful bodies sweat, who dance and laugh, who dance and shout, who are able, in the midst of their studying and organizing, their fear, their rage, their protesting, their vulnerability, their missteps and triumphs, their knowledge that they must fight the hydra-headed monster of racism and racial violence that we are not able to cauterize, to find the joy and the power of communal self-expression, end quote. That passage made me reflect on how, in what seemed the instant I entered high school, I was no longer a dancing machine, was instead self-conscious about my boogieing. how the confines of premature and restrictive manhood stripped away the joy of letting loose to the music. Just like that, dancing was uncool, which is also to say how quick fast, I was more unfree. One of the many remarkable things about Liz's brilliant book is her pointing to the essentialness of freedom, of the freedom inherent in dancing. And I mean really communing one's body with the music. One of its great gifts was giving me a metric for measuring a form of freedom that I hadn't yet considered. And in this republic, which is day by day legislating away our liberties, especially those who are disempowered to begin, in this land which demands that the Trayvon generation and the rest of us fight the hydra-headed monster of racial and gendered violence and other oppressive forces, don't we need myriad simple ways to resist, to reap joy when we're bending this arc toward justice? A couple of months back, I crashed Liz's book release in Harlem. It was nice, some of y'all were there. At the end of it, a DJ started playing cuts, many of which were from my Michael Jackson is my cousin, and I'm bringing him to show and tell era of prevaricating. Soon, Liz and others started tugging people to the makeshift dance floor. Still less free me joined them and begrudged a few songs of semi-stiff two-stepping. I can attest, however, that Liz and her peoples had no such apprehensions. There was a moment when her son Simon joined her on the floor. There they were, their hands clasped up high and beaming at each other as they moved in step. Believe me when I tell you, I have seen few things, if any, more emblematic of love and joy. Thank you, Liz, for being a model in word and deed.
Turns out you don't want to follow Mitch after he reads a piece. Particularly about dancing, because I too cannot dance, and so I deeply felt that. I am of the age where the hairs on my face have turned gray. And so people ask me questions like, how long have you known this person? And you realize with getting older comes a history that sometimes you aren't as mindful of as you should be. And in preparing for this day, I was thinking about how long I've known Elizabeth. I was thinking about when we first met. I was sent to this wild prison. It's called Red Onion State Prison. It was on the gutted outside of a mountain. I met this guy who we just called Dread. And everybody called me Shahid. And he said, Shahid, I think you'd enjoy this book. It's this anthology of poetry. I don't know what on my face said poet, because I wasn't announcing that to the group of men I was incarcerated with, many of whom were serving life sentences. And poetry wasn't the kind of thing that we sought out, that we desired to discover. But he said, I think you would dig this book. And he gave it to me. It was Every Shut Eye Ain't Sleep. The last poet, and I should say an anthology of poetry is more a collection of angels and wayward angels who are trying to give you some sense of what you might be in the world. And I remember reading the book and discovering Elizabeth's work. And that was the first time I met you. Years later, wanting to read more of your work, I would ask a librarian to get Antebellum Dream Book on interlibrary loan. I should say that we live in a moment where people talk about mass incarceration as if it is a thing that keeps us awake at night, and maybe it does. But when I went to prison in 1996, Black folks did not publicly talk about the need to keep men and women and children and young girls out of prison cells. In fact, there was a different rhetoric to describe my existence. I was a menace to society. And this wasn't cabin to right-wing conservatives. It wasn't cabin to people who I might name my enemy. It was the language that people I loved had to talk about me because they couldn't understand why I had did what landed me in a prison cell. And I got this book not thinking that she would write about prison. And yes, she did. And I felt like seen in a way that it doesn't make sense to be seen by a poet unless you have been seen in that way. I came home and I remember I was working in DC and I was like grappling with these young kids trying to get them to care about a poem. And I said, I know Elizabeth Alexander and I'm gonna send her your poems. And they was like, you don't know nobody, you know? They was like, I don't know why this dude be lying to us talking about he know the poets we reading. And you sent us this box of your work. And you wrote this letter. And when I read it in front of the students, they felt seen and felt known. But I want to talk about the moment that I felt seen and felt known. I had applied to Cave Canem. It was a poetry workshop for Black poets. I applied expecting to get in, but I only expected to get in because you ever needed something so desperately that you just had to predict it would happen to make sense of the world for yourself? And I got in. And it's funny that you talked about dancing because the night that we really talked for the first time was a night of dancing. And I actually had drank a little bit that night. So I don't really know if it actually happened. Except I had his book. People talk about me these days and they have a lot of kind and generous things to say about my life as an artist, about my work, and I am like greatly appreciative. I mean, I tell my son I'm a genius all of the time now. But that night, avoiding the dance floor as if I was Mitchell Jackson, pretending my cousin was Michael Jackson, I was the dude that wanted to have an intellectual conversation at 1 a.m. And poets were like Marvel characters to me. And so somehow I pulled Elizabeth to the side and I asked for something that she had written about Black men. And she gives me this book with stickies in it because it was literally the book in 2006 that she was carrying around on tour. I'm gonna read 2 short passages at the end. She says, the young men I have known who make me think of John Michael Basquiat are as brilliant and bratty, believing of their own hype, sleeping with women but preferring each other's company, materially and intellectually privileged, relentlessly clever, disdainful of school, deliberately indecipherable, smarty pants, eclectically well-read, lovers and collectors of words in English and other languages, lovers of hard music, radiant, nasty, troubled children. And later, she says, it's presumptuous to think that all Black artists in some way belong to each other, are part of the same large and bumptious family, but I'm a weird sister ever searching for her strange Black artist brothers. The thing we desire most as writers, I think, is for people to recognize that we see the world that we live in. But the other thing that we desire is to be seen by each other. And I think about the Trayvon generation. I think about the arc of your career. I think about what you demand us to do with our work. And I am both humbled and encouraged. And I did 8.5 years in prison. And I only wept one time. And I find these days that what moves me most is realizing that an artist like you is attempting to fill the gap of need, of desire, of want, of joy that so troubles a human being that the thing they lose is the willingness to admit that they suffered in this world and that they deserve more than that. So I thank you.
This is so funny because my family and I were talking about the other night. I grew up Jehovah's Witness. And one thing about being a witness, the men got to give lectures at the lectern, and the women had to sit and give skits. So, but I know this is not a skit. We're talking real. That was amazing, Mitchell. That was amazing. Dwayne, thank you so much for that.
You go for it.
So, Natalie Diaz, thanks so much for pulling us together. This is one of the most moving books I've put my hands on in a really, really long time. And I wanted to start by reading a passage from it. Just because I feel like we're living in a time where there's this conversation that needs to be had that is so deeply hard to have. And with the Trayvon Generation, you're giving us the tools to begin to have it. And so I'm so grateful. And this is a poem by Clint Smith, the beloved Clint Smith. And Elizabeth writes, this poem by Clint Smith gets to the how do you pronounce it?
Perennialness.
Perennialness.
It might not be a word, but perennialness.
And sorrow of race in America, but the minute you say it, it becomes a word, and it makes so much sense. Your national anthem. Today, a black man who was once a black boy, like you, got down on one of his knees and laid his helmet on the grass as this country sang. It's ode to the promise it never kept. And the woman in the grocery store line in front of us is on the phone, and she is telling someone on the other line that this black man who was once a black boy, like you, should be grateful we live in a country where people aren't killed for things like this. You know, she says, in some places they would hang you for such a blatant act of disrespect. Maybe he should go live there instead of here so he can appreciate what he has. And then she turns around and sees you sitting in the grocery cart surrounded by lettuce and yogurt and frozen chicken thighs. And you smile at her with your toothless gum smile. And she says that you are the cutest baby she has ever seen, and tells me how I must feel so lucky to have such a beautiful baby boy. And I thank her for her kind words, even though I should not thank her, because I know that you will not always be a black boy. But one day you may be a black man, and you may decide your country hasn't kept its promise to you either. And this woman or another like her will forget that you were ever this boy. And they will make you into something else and tell you to be grateful for what you've been given. And then Elizabeth writes, the small word may is the devastation in this poem. Julie?
Thank you. Everything that has been spoken about or read today is really moving, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everyone who participated in the making of this, and thank you for this beautiful book. So there's a moment in this book where Elizabeth talks about John Coltrane's album, I Love Supreme. And you say John Coltrane's eternal album, I Love Supreme, was made in one session in 1964 in the midst of the accruing violence of war and assassination. A refrain plays like the chanting Coltrane had come to understand in his religious practice. There is music, 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 and no words. And after some minutes, we hear Coltrane's voice recorded over and over, rendering it more powerful and himself not alone, and making community as he sings, a love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme. What can the black chant make happen? It sustains us. It is balm. It is remembrance. It is provocation. It is incantation. It is human. It is power. And then she goes on, the first time I heard this record, I was 19 years old in a college black literature class, not new to jazz, but new to such supreme transcendence, that word transcendence. The students and professor sat together in a small seminar room and listened to the album all the way through without speaking. And the sound lifted us in ways we did not fully understand, but knew had reached into our souls and asked us to be human together. Almost all of the people in that room, black and brilliant, have been dead for years. I remember them and carry what they gave me. And so I had, that brought up, when we were thinking about this, brought up this small thing I had written on Coltrane, based off of his, kind of the structure is based off of his giant steps, and is broken into 12 parts based on that kind of, that structure. 12 notes on listening. I hope I have enough time for
Take all the
it's
time
5
you need.
minutes, I hope. Okay, to find the dynamic, interventions, inventions in the fabric of existence and being, mythic, the desire for testament of the soul, deep interior, mourning, joy, exhilaration, medium, muse, vessel, horn. 2, multidimensional, polyphonic, the conditions of being, stretching space-time and the limits of the unknown, uncharted, to reach in and touch that depth, the intuitive insistence on being, reverberations in the break, or as another possibility, completely like abstraction, pushing the boundaries of existence, accessing larger, more complex, more consequential entities than most cultures permit one to believe. Reconstructing imaginative capabilities, augmenting, morphing to exaltation. 3, contortions or harmonious, spontaneous interrogations, flexing through the hall of mirrors of our perforated realities, fractally disseminating and reconstructing drops, light, speed, cadence, shape, reality, compressing the myriad of notes into the howl, wail, serenade, like the mark, mumbling inside the indiscernible whole, finding the sound of Nagasaki through a flute, a la Coltrane, minding the breaks and shifting the axis of the world by how the sound touches you, by how the mark touches you. Kaya Sareno says composition is simply a different type of imagination than abstract painting. 4, in the face of impossibility, catching the detritus, the molecules, the morning and the light, elegy, pain, love. Mysticism touch takes one, heuristic touch, a transport, coming from another place, another entity or entities. Progress and futurity, imaginative, other dimensions and possibilities of love being with hearts and tongues. Liberation into indeterminacy, a wayward life, the continual release of the fugitive. 5, representation is definitive, exposes the failures. Abstraction pulls from that, mimics, slices, melds, and spins it into multitudes, blowing out the limitless possibilities of space, touch, emotion, and rebelliousness. A modernist, futurist, inexhaustible being, offering his lungs, his sounds, his composition as active steps within the language, the music, by himself, verging on recklessness, to break apart and out of paradigms, out of bounds, celestial and infinite. The cycle of fifths as existential consciousness, transcendence. 7, outside of the violence, hatred, racism, and social death that is prescriptive, train chases every other possible dimension: cosmopolitanism, universalism, Buddhism, Hinduism, God, notions of the beguiling of the opiate-infused brain, experiential, again, beautiful. 8, constantly mining, mixing, evolving, shifting, insatiable and never satisfied, on unstable grounds, ruminations, the terrain and the tenor, the flight, a form of imaginative invention, a refusal of fatality with grave confidence. I don't believe in standing still. Radical humility of the knowledge that our perception of reality is fragmentary. 9, free, going out on the edge as far as possible, liberation through abstraction, remembering breaking free from portraiture to find a form, a language, the breaking open of liberatory imagination, innumerable possibilities at once, ultimate compression of space and time. When drawing, pull out of myself and lose place to go deep into a pressurized state of disfiguration and disembodiment, lose all sense of a cultural self, get lost inside a beat, inside a sonic pulsing system of half links, half consciousness, half lit, find the break. 10, working against the parameters of reality and the machinations of white supremacy constantly defining and delineating being, against the dominion of language, representation, against the constructs and methods of social death, in the face of trauma embodied as a response to the terror, war, and determination to extinguish the singular and collective being, resisting, denying decimation into minute segments. 11, to look forward, the bits, the measures, data, infrastructure, symbols of power, soldering them onto the new machine, fusing the parts with marks that come and try to form something else legible but descend into their own illegibility. The invention of a language, a system of marks. The marks are comfortable with that. They create the headache. 12, I always liken it to looking at the sun. Hearing John Coltrane is like the brightest light you can hear. Mining from that deep, deep part of himself to stretch and extend space-time into the infinite cosmic ways of being free. Can the place of intuition and interiority be a place of communality?
Communality.
Thank you, communality. A place of the murmurings, maybe even the undercommons. Can that place be the ontological congregation of resistance? Intuition as an ontological congregation of resistance, a constant persistence of the imperceptible multitudes of entities who exalt the real.
Thank you.
Really? Oh, man.
Thank you both. Oh, my goodness. So first of all, you know, Natalie, our midwife, our love, our hearts. You hold us, you bring us together. You make sure everything's done the way it's supposed to. You make sure that every song is sung, and we love you for that. So thank you for making this happen. And friends, you know, by which I mean all of you, but I specifically mean Mitch and Dwayne and Jackie and Julie. I think, isn't it just the best thing to belong to each other? Mm-hmm. Isn't it just the best thing to belong to this community where maybe you don't see someone for 20 years? Maybe you never met someone, but you met them through their words. So, you know, we can sort of trace that in a million ways. You know, the story that gets me every time of Dwayne meeting me through my words and how. And I met Mitch through his words before we met each other. And everything in between, to know that we are community, and to know that we are community in body, but also in the things that we make and that we offer, is really, the children aside, is the single great gift of my life. The single great gift of my life, and what all of you as artists and human beings have in common is that you come open and unguarded. That's the only way to be. Don't be covering shit up. Don't be coming here like acting like we don't love each other. Don't be coming here,
We don't
you
know
know,
each other.
like just to offer ourselves is actually in very, very, very short supply in this world. But it is power. It is power. So I'm going to read a little bit, and then we will talk together. And this, so you know, we're all parents. We're the mamas up here right now. So I think that is our spatial arrangement, and we'll be joined by Dwayne and Mitch later. So I'm going to read two sections. This is from a chapter called Whether the Negro Sheds Tears. And I think that, also today, as we think to Friday's decisions of the Supreme Court and all that is ahead, but as of just Friday, half the American population was taken out. We are no longer fully human in the eyes of the law. It's official. It's official. And that motherfucker, Clarence Thomas, told us that he's coming for the rest of us. So that's what happened, like it's here. It's here. So to the question of our humanity, that's some of what is happening here. On April 3rd, 1905, a researcher named Alvin Borquist at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, wrote to the preeminent scholar, activist, writer, theorist, and chronicler of race, W.E.B. Du Bois, at his academic home of Atlanta University. Borquist wrote, "Dear Sir, we are pursuing an investigation here on the subject of crying as an expression of the emotions, and should like very much to learn about its peculiarities among the colored people. We have been referred to you as a person competent to give us information upon the subject. We desire especially to know about the following salient aspects. 1, whether the Negro sheds tears. 2, if so, under what general condition? Anger, fear, shame, pain, sorrow, etc. Any information on any of these topics will be gratefully received." Think of the first sign that marks human beings as human and alive, a baby's cry at birth. Think of crying and all it expresses and carries, and crying as a fundamental involuntary human expression like laughter. The researcher wanted to know if Black people cried, which in essence means, as a query to Du Bois, do you and your people feel? Are you human? Are Black people human? Are Black people human? Do Black people do what Black people do? Are Black people people? If Black people are not people and do not cry, then they do not experience pain or grief or trauma or shock or sorrow. If Black people do not experience pain or grief or trauma or shock or sorrow, are they human? And if they are not human, can their continued violation be justified? Can Black people be harmed if they cannot cry to say so? Du Bois replied to Borquist a few days later in a letter that is a list poem unto itself. The first line simply reads, "The Negro sheds tears." We Black people are made mostly of water, blood, and tears. Our black, gold, brown, sienna, blue, black, yellow, cream, umber, chocolate, sand, wet sand, beige, acorn, black skin contains those waters. We bleed, we shed oceans of tears. Our waters contain our sorrows. Almost a year after George Floyd was killed, I watched the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who killed him by kneeling on his neck for over 9 minutes. Again, as with the video, I want to turn away, but I cannot turn away because I feel I have to witness. Charles McMillian, a neighborhood elder at 61, weeps on the stand and cannot stop. I feel helpless. I don't have a mama either. I understand him. George Floyd's brother, Phil O'Nees, cries on the stand when shown a photograph of himself as a child with his older brother, George. He says, "George was a big mama's boy. I cry a lot, but George, he loved his mom. He showed us how to treat our mom, how to respect our mom. He loved her so dearly." All the Black men in this trial seem to cry. And the young people say they should have done something to stop it. The young man at the store who was the cashier for Floyd's transaction wishes he hadn't questioned the counterfeit bill. Black people, including unimaginably brave Darnella Frazier, say, "I should have intervened, I should have stopped it." The young people assume responsibility for the horror they could not prevent. George Floyd cried for his mother as he died. I see Black elders cry watching this trial. As millions waited for the verdict in the Chauvin trial, police killed a 16-year-old girl in Columbus, Ohio, Ma'Khia Bryant. In tears our sorrow, in tears our grief, in tears our anger, in tears our rage. In tears swallowed are cancer, hypertension, respiratory ailments. In tears swallowed is dis-ease. In tears shed is sometimes no relief on the other side. Black tears unshed and swallowed every day, and black tears shed. And so then, before we go into conversation, I wanted to think about, so much of this book is listening to young people, talking to young people, listening to elders, trying to figure out the way forward, and looking to our creativity, the visual art, so you're seeing, what's in the book, and the poetry and the wisdom and the scholarship that is in our mighty, mighty, mighty African American tradition, and trying to think if the power of that can move us forward in some way. And so I want to read a bit, and I'm thinking about Coltrane too. So a little bit of it is going to be what you read as well. I'd like it to be some stereophonic Coltrane, because I think that there are very profound questions in there. And I'm going to read some about my dad. I wish for our young people freedom of movement, of thought, of imagination. That is why the brilliance of our writers and artists is so crucial for them, to learn from and to call them into their own imagining and self-expression. And our tradition has an infinite supply of stories of ingenious survival and making a way out of no way. We do not yet know what a more just future looks like. We do not fully know what freedom feels like. It will take many forms. I wish for our young people rest from the unending labor that is race work and from the spectral anxiety that is part of what it is to be Black. Peter Kuhnhardt's film, King in the Wilderness, chronicles the last year in the life of Martin Luther King, lonely as he leaves the ones he loves to do the work he must do, and that he senses may bring him to his death. It is narrated by Dr. King's friends and associates from that time, now elders, who tell us about that year. They are not only elders, they are survivors. And we understand the profound sacrifice and loneliness that can accompany visionary leadership and righteous work, as well as feeling a deeper sense of King, the human being, and the ideals he and his generation mates were serving. My father is one of the people who worked with Dr. King and other civil rights leaders, bringing them to the White House to meet with President Johnson and advance the shared goals and hopes of that period. He was a young man in his early 30s, 31, working as a special counsel to the president in that short, potent, hopeful stretch of American history. In King in the Wilderness, my father, now 88, is 83. He leans forward into the camera when he speaks, eyebrows raised to open his face wide in urgency. They discovered only after King's death that he was more radical than they actually knew, he says. I don't think he wanted us to take anything other than all that we deserve. And that's what radicalism in the best sense is about, using the power that you have to transform society for the better. My father is a lion in winter among his fellow wise warriors in that film, still making the case for our humanity, as has been his life's work and is now a bequest to our children. Why do I end with my father in a film when he is with us and I have so many private memories of him imparting wisdom? Because he was captured in a work of documentary art. So we're thinking about the Rodney King videotape and the Emmett Till photograph and all of these tape, the George Floyd tape, and all of this violation that we're watching. And what I'm trying to say is we have other things to watch as well. The documentary captures life force in its celluloid or paper or canvas or digital files. It is not just for me or my children. It is for anyone within the sound of the movie's voice, echoing our great, great, great friend, poet, ancestor still with us, Sekou Sundiata. This is for anyone within the sound of my voice. None of us shall live forever, but art and poetry and knowledge and wisdom do. Art and history are the indelibles. They outlive flesh. They offer us a compass or a lantern with which to move through the wilderness and allow us to imagine something different and better. What can the Black chant make happen? It sustains us. It is balm. It is remembrance. It is provocation. It is incantation. It is humor. It is power. Going back, we hear Coltrane's voice recorded over and over, rendering it more powerful and himself not alone, and making community as he sings, a love supreme, 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 a love supreme. The human connection has been all but gone in the last years of the global pandemic that has kept us apart from the people we love, the culture we need, the touch we crave, in a time when we most need to love and grieve. Millions of people are missing the dead they were unable to comfort in their final hours and be with when they passed or ritualize after they died. Half of planet Earth was sequestered for 18 months. If we think we can measure the effect of that right now, we are wrong. But we do know the losses have been disproportionately Black and brown. Artists make radical solutions all day long. Soup from a stone, beauty from thin air. We see and try and discard and see again. We vision, we invent, we do it in the dark, we bring it into community. Artists continue to generate in a dangerous world that is nonetheless overflowing with life force and power. Creativity, making, and imagining animate Black self-determination with that which only culture can provide. So just finally, we Black people were largely brought to this soil and this to Friday in the category of property. In the eyes of the law, we were 3/5 human. Out of this status, we became the seers who have continually articulated the problem, the hope, and the possibility of America. We have expressed the core of what it is to be human and to aspire to better enact that humanity. So, thank you.
I have to say that one thing I love so much about this book was the reprieve of the art. You know, the reprieve of the art and the reprieve of the poetry. So it reminded me that as an artist, when we think things are unbearable, that we have this, you know, and we have these words and we have this voice and this ability to make more art and more words and continue the conversation. Which makes me, I have a question for you, if that's okay. I was listening to Jason Reynolds speak about his books, and someone said, I know you write books for Black children. And he said, I don't write books for Black children, I write books for everybody, but I'm speaking to Black children. And I thought about the conversation that's being had in the Trayvon generation, and who, when you were sitting down to write this, I felt like you were talking to me as a mother of, you know, Black sons, and that it was for everyone. But I was curious about that for you and the creation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the powerful thing about anything that we make is whoever we're speaking to, if we do it well enough, then it's out there. And I think that's one of the kind of amazing things is what people then do with it. And even the people you might have been talking to might do something different with it than what you thought. So certainly, I was in a mode of direct address, you know, not just to my sons themselves, but to my sons and as an educator of over 30 years to all of the young people I ever taught and loved. And of those I taught, I loved most of them. they remain the same age. So that's what was kind of easy, was that, it was like, okay, and everybody's 20, The kids are 20 now, like everybody is 20. But, really to those people with whom I learned so much and who I saw Black literature and culture change them, change them. I saw it,
Wow.
And I think also in the love and in the protection, that question of just, and I follow Gwendolyn Brooks's dictum that, there is no such thing as other people's children,
Yes.
so that even if you start with thinking about the ones who you're responsible for, that as a society, we have to extend from there. It's not enough. I mean, that's what's wrong with our society, is if you only love your own kids, right? I mean, that doesn't get us nearly far enough, and we all have more than that to give to make community. So I think that in that, kind of like, what do you think? What are you seeing? How are you, baby? How do you feel about this? I mean, I think certainly starting with my kids, I feel like, in some ways, there was that moment, 2012, Trayvon Martin is hunted and murdered. And then 2013, the convergence of George Zimmerman's being let off. And when that verdict came, along with the film Fruitvale Station. And the way that film, the way that a Black artist said, okay, we've all seen and been traumatized by the video of Oscar Grant being murdered, but in this film, with the device of a day in the life, a day in a regular life, a day in a regular life, a day in a life with coffee and groceries and fussing and loving and children and mothers and jobs and, all of the things that happen in the cycle of that day, which of course you watch in that amazing film knowing what's going to happen. But here is the person, so he can no longer be dehumanized in that videotape. So there was something about the combination of the despair, of knowing that George Zimmerman, hunted Trayvon Martin, and the art making alongside it, and having to talk with sons who at the time were 12 and 13. That felt like that was sort of the crux of what the offering was. I guess the final thing I'll say is that, Toni Morrison says, in her pithy way, she's talking about Invisible Man, and she says, invisible to whom? Not invisible to me. So that question of who are you talking to? And I'm certainly not talking to anyone who I'm trying to convince. I'm certainly not talking to anyone who doesn't love Black people. I mean, anybody can read the book, but I ain't talking to you, and I hope you learn from it, but I'm talking to people I love. Yeah,
Completely comes across.
yeah.
Thank you for that.
What else? How's everyone's kids doing?
Oh, my goodness.
What's happening with the kids?
My son is here and my godson is here, which I think was part of that. I'm sorry, Julie, I just wanted to.
Yes, please.
Which I think in that poem, when we talk about the Clint Smith poem,
Yep.
that small word may, I hadn't thought about the way our language has changed over the years, and our dreams for our children, just how we dream them has changed. I think as a young mother, I might have believed in an absolute, right? They will grow up. They will, do this, and that will has become a may, and that short trick of language is so it's huge, and I think this is the case for every mother with a child of color in this country who's awake, right? That especially a son of color. I mean, we have a whole other set of fears for our children who identify as daughters, but our children who identify as sons, there is this real fear of what is going to happen tomorrow as we see this happening more and more. And again, back to Trayvon Generation, I think that was the thing that I know that was what made it so readable and absorbing, is this conversation. It's like I'm having a conversation with someone who gets this, who sees all, and as an artist, of course, who sees all of the way my mind is working in this era, even to the point of like, I'm gonna close my eyes now and make art and pay no attention to because it's a form of survival.
I'm, oh, go ahead.
No,
please.
no, I'm saying it's true. Please, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was looking at this beautiful painting, and I'm so appreciative that you all showed the art, because, you know, the idea of the book is that there's a whole conversation with art. Art is part of the text, very deliberately, in a way that is not strictly illustrative, you know, which I kind of feel like it's mirroring a way that we live. You know, I mean, I don't think that any of us thinks like, you know, this poem explains this painting, or this, you know, it's not about like, or when people ask, I know people say like, you know, what do you write about? Like, I don't know, like stuff, you know, I mean, you know, or what did you mean when you said, you know, or what did you know, it's like, well, I wrote it. If I didn't write it well enough, then, you know. So, and I think that way in which the visual art speaks for itself, and I hope makes people feel in a different part of their bodies, but none of it with answers, just with more experience. You know, not meant as balm, but meant as experience and more, and maybe also as a way of bringing more of our community literally into the book and into the conversation.
I mean, and that's really kind of apparent with the first work on the cover as well.
Yeah.
And then how those reverberations throughout the book. I really, like, I think what's really something that struck me was how your first essay, like Adrian talks about this in the introduction, the Rodney King video, and what happens in the catalog for the Black Male show, the catalog that's the book that Thelma did along with that show. And thinking when I first read the Trayvon Generation it was a New Yorker piece,
Yep,
right? First, when I first read that, remembering that piece that was in the book, the Black Male book. And I guess one of the thoughts that keeps coming back to me about this is that a lot of the work that's being made right now, or that we're being kind of, the world we're living in to make this art and to like participate in this context, is happening through this very highly mediated world that we're experiencing. This kind of, I call it the Hall of Mirrors in that piece, but like this social reality that is really determined by algorithms, or these kind of echo chambers of our own kind of making through these, you know, unless we're very attentive to try and really read and pay attention to those worlds outside of our own kind of constructed, algorithmic, mediated rooms, we have to like really look for that information. And I think that, and that's one of the reasons we can live in these worlds of post-truths, or where 3/5 of human might be a reality again. Like, is because of a denial of truths, and that not just that becoming a reality, it is a reality every day in this country, in the context in which we live in so many ways, but it would be a reality outside of spaces of incarceration. And so I think that, like, this, to me, one of the spaces that I think is really interesting is kind of how media has shifted how we understand fear and the reverberations of that in terms of like the makings in our imagination. And, you know, when you think of the children who are watching these on their, like, you can't protect them in any form of, you know, there is no space of that. Not that really you ever could really protect children from violence, because if violence is coming after you or your children, it's ever present. And whether it's in a context of war or, you know, the antebellum period in this country, it is something that everyone is witness to in a way, no matter what. And I think that you see that in a lot of places in the world, but you really get a sense of that through this mediated environment we live in, and where you're getting these reels played over and over and over and over. So to me, how do you make in that reality? How do you even understand community when community is something that's so shattered by desires of algorithms like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever else is kind of determining these structures? And how do we have a sense of who are we responsible to in that space? Like, how do we think through those? So I wonder, I was thinking about that question, and I think it's I wanted to just ask you, because it's something that came up in the kind of way the Rodney King beating was so, was shown on all these media, on television media at the time, and now how this has taken on a very different reality. And the George Floyd murder took place during pandemic, when there was no distraction outside of news. There was no sport. There weren't any other things happening that have happened every day since. And so I just think like the kind of attention that could be paid to that moment was very specific in that context. So I guess it's a question I'm wondering about, and a space that I feel like is one of the questions of our time in this moment in terms of trying to negotiate. How do you build language and continue this kind of work in these spaces where that is so, I don't know, like vertiginous or unstable or ungrounded, like.
Well, I mean, I guess in that question is, how does any of us continue to make stuff, you know, when it is a challenging.
But we've always made like that's the invention of American art, right? In any moment, if you think of as music, real American music is coming from blackness, then that is the invention, is from that space. So we've always invented and made, but it's hard to make. Like, how do you do that when you're living in like, I don't know what the question is exactly, but they're different, right? Like.
I think, well, please.
Well, I was going to say maybe Mitch and Dwayne can come back up and help us answer it.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, Jackie. Sorry, I don't mean to be.
No,
it's such a great question.
It's a great question.
Can I have that bottle?
Gentlemen, there are black people in the future.
I love this.
It's so great. It's so great.
Appreciate that. Beautiful. I just really wanted to be on stage. I ain't even gonna lie.
So you all been listening and absorbing. What's on your mind? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I don't know. I think to that question, what you said last about your father, like, it is true that we've always lived in a moment where some of our experiences have been curated by people other than us. But it's also true that some of those experiences that have been curated by people who are other than us, meaning just not me, meaning just like not you, right? Meaning that literally is the news, meaning that like is your basketball coach, meaning that like is your teacher, right? We've had these experiences, is your church, is your local community. It's not as if social media is the first time our experiences have been curated for us. It might be the first time when it has happened on such a large scale that it feels overwhelming. It feels like you have no control. But I think the onus on all of us is to remember the choices that we have. And it is true that in that documentary, that is like another work of art. It is true that we live in an intense moment of mass incarceration, but you could watch Garrett Bradley's Time. It is true that you could listen to Vince Staples' new album. It is true that, Mitch writes a piece in Runner's World.
Yes.
Black people don't run, except from the police. And yet, when he's thinking about how to respond to Ahmaud Arbery, it is in Runner's World. And it wins a Pulitzer Prize. If he would have said, I'm working on this piece in Runner's World, I'd be like, why? Can't you write? Don't you have a blog? But so it is a point of actually my teacher used to tell my mother, because my teacher didn't talk to me, but he is inattentive. And then the teacher was trying to educate us on what inattentive meant, right? So she would be like, meaning he does not pay attention. And what she really meant was like, he doesn't pay attention to what I want him to pay attention to. We could choose to pay attention to more. And we could choose to recognize how even the horrors fit into what we want to do with the world. And that's why I love this book, because it is a case for paying attention. You know, and Black Man Says Obey, it is an argument that you could be a part of this world without being the center of it for these reasons that actually stigmatize you and the rest of us. And so I think that that's how we create. We create by remembering that, you know, if there are Black people in the future, there are Black people in the present. And we don't just exist as an accumulation of sorrow. You know, like joy is resistance.
Sure, that's true.
I was thinking about, Julie, you mentioned legibility. And I think as an artistic community that we're constantly trying to make ourselves legible to another person, another group. And I think a part of that also is like figuring out your identity, right? So like who you want to be in community with. Like I think that's why places like Cave Canem are so important, right? Or the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands, because they're bringing these really distinctive communities together. And I think that the more that we can kind of define our individuality and make ourselves legible to each other, like the greater opportunity we have to kind of reach outside of that. Like when you were saying, I'm writing to these people, but y'all can come along and get a taste of this too. And so when I think about how do we make art in a mediated space, I think about who am I and how am I defining myself? And then who does that self want to be in community with? And that's who I'm writing to. And if the rest of y'all come along with, for me, it ain't that many of y'all, then, you know, I'm happy to have the rest of them. But I think it's really important for me to understand who I am. Obviously, it's evolving, right? Like, hopefully I'll be a different, better person at 50 than I was at 46. But I do think that's really important to have a person to write towards.
Such a good point.
I've been writing towards them.
Yeah.
So frankly, I am actually good, you know. I am so good. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about sharing the stage with you all, because you know, what's interesting is that you don't actually get these opportunities as a kid when you think about what you want to do in the world. 17 years old, reading poetry, I never expected to be on the stage here. And that's the other thing, you know, it was another narrative about what the world looked like when I was 17, that I went to books to find a narrative that I could live freely in.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we create art in these spaces, because we are trying to create like images and notions and ideas of worlds that people could live freely in, even if they can't live freely in the now, right? It's an opportunity to think about what the future looks like where there are still Black people.
Yeah. I have a question I want to pose for the group. I got a text. Well, actually, it was a DM. I don't know why my son is DMing me, but my son DM'd me yesterday, and he's very slow on responding. So I responded to him immediately. He was like, Dad, I'm so scared. And I was like, huh? So I'm like, son, what are you scared about? Like, I'm thinking he had seen somebody, you know, around the neighborhood or something. He texted me back this morning, and he said, I'm so scared about the state of the world. And this is a 16-year-old, and I didn't have that awareness. Like, I was not politically engaged when I was young. Like, my community was around the block. But for all of us who are parents, like, what is the response to our children, this Trayvon generation, and he's a generation younger than them, hearing that now, right? Being that politically engaged and understanding what's happening, you know, roughly in the Supreme Court. What is the response to the Trayvon generation who's saying, I'm scared?
Such a great question.
This is a little easy softball for y'all, you know.
I know.
Keep going. Yeah.
Just stay illegible. Just
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that, you know, as Audre Lorde said, we were not meant to survive, right? And we survived anyway.
Yeah.
And the fact that we came to this country, or we were brought to this country to work until we died and create other people that worked until they died, and that we didn't die,
Right.
is the sermon that I hear in my head. That is a sermon of survival. Like, this is not going to kill us because we've survived, and we continue to find these ways. I want to hear other people's thought, but this part in the book where Elizabeth writes, but for all of us, language is how we say who we are, and we cannot solve our problems without it. Language is one of the few media with which to make conundrums visible and solutions tangible. And we've always had language. We've always been able, even when we weren't allowed to read or write, we had a way of telling stories, of singing stories, of dancing stories, and getting the message to the next place, that the next group of people that we are, this is hard as fuck, but we're gonna be okay. And I was thinking about what y'all was saying about dancing, and you can always bring the dance party. I just realized it's like at Bill T. Jones, like everywhere Elizabeth is, there's a dance. And that we have that, we have these ways of getting through this moment, and that is what life is, getting through a whole lot of moments until our final moment. And we got them. I think of our young people, and we got them as but we're not going to go down without a fight. So and our fight is in our art, our fight is in our writing, our fight is in our giving them dinner. It's all kinds of ways of that having that resistance. But
What would you say?
No, I agree. And I mean, I go back to this place of like when all efforts were trying to extinguish a people, and that project failed. I mean, fundamentally, not only did it fail, but it gave birth to like some of the most interesting creative projects that we know of, and is testament to what Jackie's saying, I think. And I say this also, like, you have these kind of really intense cycles here, but I also think we coming from the continent and coming from a place like Ethiopia, where you've only seen kind of a devolution into a bigger, more and more intense quagmire. There is, my kids bring this up, like we just want to like burn the system down, burn the house down, and having come from a reality like that, you definitely don't want to do that. Be reminding them that there are so many projects through which to work to shift something. And having come from a place that did try to shoot them down and burn them down, route, it's been 50 years of only going into a place of further and more destruction, and a lot of poverty and a lot of violence. So I think that I'm interested in that history, and I'm also, I think it's really important to look back at previous moments of these kinds of struggles where you've seen real progress happen, even if it was only for a decade. I mean, and then and that's been what has happened in the history of this country is this constant kind of move forward by however much, and then you have this complete reactionary backward movement and reactionary project. But part of it is also the contradiction of life, and living in this moment of immense contradictions. And this was like this is from early Buddhist kind of texts and thoughts. Is you live in these worlds where suffering and a certain kind of enlightenment are happening at the same time, and how do you exist in between those places? So I do think that that's important to remind our children that of their power and of their staying power, but also that these contradictions and these really problematic polarities that we're finding ourselves constantly swinging between are essential. We took our kids to Pride on Saturday, the Dyke March, and there was when we were there, I said to them, you can't shut this energy down. Like, no one can shut this down. Like, they can try in however ways they want to in a systemic way, but you can't stop this. This has been happening since before gay rights and gay marriage and whatever, and this is continuing. It's not going anywhere. And so, I don't know, there is that aspect of it.
Well, I think also what that illustrates is, I think, operating as though, there just can't be a generation gap.
Yeah.
Like that just, we can't have that. We can't do that. We don't really do that, actually. I mean, I think that, because of in Black families and communities, there, I think, tends to be some more cross-generational understanding, which means we have to listen to each other, and that we have to listen to people older than us and younger than us. I mean, that was always one of my, going away to college pieces of advice to any young people I knew, and this will take you through, is as soon as you get there, make some friends older than you and make some friends younger than you. By older than you, I mean like old people. And by younger than you, I mean like go, teach in the community center or something like that. Because then you will always understand yourself in more than just the moment that there is. And then you will also always have to, kind of interpolate and pick from and hear what makes sense. I mean, growing up, I don't know if we all had these parents, but my parents are, Depression era Black people. So, a culture of complaint was not something, that was really allowed, So if I would complain about something, my father has in fact, said to me on many occasions, like, well, are you enslaved?
Yo, I would say that to my kid today.
Are you enslaved? Or, another refrain was, well, Harriet Tubman figured it out.
Wow.
It's like, okay, Harriet Tubman figured it
Yeah,
out.
I'm still in all of these.
But I think that taking that in all directions, and that children are not to be seen and not heard. Children are to talk and get into it, and I think we don't do well without that. But I think what the long line of history reminds us of, that is very hard right now. Is that right now, today, right now, it is for real, genuinely hard right now. So how we think about and remember the seeds that we're planting, how we think about what it means, just to resist cynicism, and to always think, what can you do? Again, Toni Morrison, I can't remember, I was trying to remember, I couldn't find the exact quote where she basically says, work from where you are. Stand where you are and do what you can and move out from there. That you may not, you say, oh my God, I can go fix all the world's problems. Oh my God, they overturned Roe, they're going to overturn gay marriage, like it's all happening. But what if you think the thing you actually can figure out right here, right now, this table, what can you do right now? There is always an answer. There's always an answer. And I think that, in a genuinely despairing time, I just want us to remember that, because also like we're a little exhausted, So one thing youth actually does have is like some energy, snap, crackle, pop, and so just literally, if we were, in an agricultural setting, the 20-year-olds would be doing something different from what the 50-year-olds were doing. But everybody needs everybody else.
I want to bring up the idea of in illegibility, because you brought it up again, but I actually think this is something that I'm really interested in, is this space of for me, there's always been this resistance to using anything that was legible in terms of an image in my work. I mean, I use aspects of that, and there's elements of that, but there's this desire to stay away from that could be given, that you could describe with language in a very particular way or direct way, and I was really resistant to doing anything that was representational in that sense. And I wanted to, I think that's a very different thing to do with words and language, but I still think it happens a lot. We understand it, I think, really, really easily with music. That, because it's still legible emotionally, there's all this other legibility, but there's a way where when there's a mumbling and a kind of humming and a certain kind of, Nina Simone doing Flo Mi La over, that's the lyric, then there's a certain space where it's what happens with the voice and the tenor of that is what is communicating something. And I think that's what's possible in abstraction. So I guess I wanted to ask all of you about that space of, creative liberation or creative imagination in this space where it's not for anyone, but for this space of that invention, you know,
Yeah.
and how that works for you.
I was thinking a few things when you were speaking about, I think it's Frost where he's talking about like all thinking is metaphorical thinking or something like that, and how, like, what is my relationship to metaphor? Because I think that the metaphor gets to say the kind of illegible thing along with the tangible thing, right? Like, you can create a metaphor that takes somewhere else that they didn't intend to go, or you didn't intend necessarily for them to go. So I think that's important. And I was also thinking, like, when I read your work, I see so much repetition. And I think about Stein thinking about repetition, you know, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose, and how it is not like a just direct repetition, that it's like opening up a space for another kind of interpretation. And so to me, this use, like if we're talking about how do we do what you do, which obviously I can't do what you do
No, I
in an
hear you.
abstract, but as in language, I think that I can create metaphor or use repetition in a way that it expands and opens up a different kind of meaning other than the literal interpretation. And that maybe that's the kind of gift of that illegibility that is really an offering to another person.
Well, also in repetition, like, I mean, there's so much to say about repetition, right? I mean, I think that when you repeat something, it becomes unfamiliar.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a very cool thing that happens, which is why, you know, I sang A Love Supreme more times than it is in the book, but also the book talks about Michael Harper's great poem, and where it's not about, you know, 3 times and now we're done.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's like, how long do you need to repeat it until it starts to make something happen? Until people start to sing with you, until you realize you're alone, until people can hear something that's different in it. I think that also with repetition is, I mean, like that, you know, in our, I mean, I think our music, it's our waters, it's our bodies, it's what's at the heart of everything that we make and do. And so that repetition is part of the patterning, you know, and finding patterns that you don't necessarily know what they'll be when you go into them is part of, you know, what Prince reminds us, that there's joy in repetition, you know, and so some of it is also, I think, the part of making art that's like a kid. I like that word, 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 you know, and you see what it becomes, what it can become. And I think that sometimes because everybody wants to consume and know about, you know, what does the Negro think, that I think that sometimes that has taken away our space of abstraction and strangeness and, you know, exploration and experimentation. I mean, that's something I've written about as well in Black, you know, poetics. Like, who says we're not experimental? You know, like, who says it's not, you know, an amazing, amazing experiment to make Black music and bring those forms into poetry? And why is it venerated as being, you know, what sort of high art is? And why are we always being looked to explain, even in our non-art lives? Explain, 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 explain. You can explain yourself into the grave.
I just, you know, it's interesting, right? Because I sort of also though feel like one of the conscious dilemmas of being a artist and believing that it's your task to say something about something that nobody else has said. It's already an impossible task, right? But still, depending on who your subject is, like, it is so much work in deciding what is the chronological order that matters. It is so much work in deciding that whose story gets to be juxtaposed with somebody else's story. And so it is this one thing about, like, I actually don't believe I have access to the kind of abstraction that a visual artist does, unless I redact words, right? I don't think I have access to that, but I also think that I've lived in a world that didn't have a story that says, yo, you could get this. I could read this to my grandmother. You know, I could read this to my child who is like texting me like, are you okay? I'm like, dude, I'm on a stage at the Whitney with Elizabeth Alexander. Like, you know I was supposed to be here. Like, literally, I text you the, like, run of show. And you say, why did you send me all of this? You know? But But like, I do think it's like a reluctance. Like you say, who is your audience? But if I write a piece for the New York Times Magazine and you say, who is my audience? And I resist chronological order. And I pretend like ain't no gods giving me the sequence of events to make a good piece. Like that is like really, really hard, sometimes debilitating work to decide what to throw away and what to keep when you're trying to tell a story that spans 6 months, let alone 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. And so like one of the things I deeply believe in is communicating a story in such a way that my grandmother wants to hear it. And she's heard more stories in her life than I'll ever tell. And I do think sometimes we excuse legibility by arguing for the value of the inscrutable because we believe that we have lived lives that have been that people have tried to explain so much that they haven't given us room to like shed tears. And yet I still believe there's some deep value in writing something meaningful that like my homies who don't have PhDs in literature, who don't know who Frantz Fanon is. Right. You know, one time I was like, yeah, I was reading Fanon. And he was like, Fanon? I want to write for the dude that mispronounces Fanon. You know what I mean? I want to write for the woman who actually doesn't know who Audre Lorde is. Yeah. When I be like, yo, I wanted to tell my wife one day, I didn't do this, thankfully, but I wanted to be like, yo, the master's tools won't never dismantle the master's house, baby. Yeah. She'd be like, yo, you said that? Yeah, you know? like feeling fucked up. By Etheridge Knight, talk about repetition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I could read that poem to my grandmother or to my father, and this would be their response. You better buy that woman some roses. I don't know. Like, they would think I said it, you know, because they would feel the energy and be like, yo, I hear that lament coming from your soul. I don't know what you did, but, and I'd be like, yo, that's not me. He said that. You ain't got to lie to me, boy. Yeah. You know, you can make this right some kind of way. So I want to write that, though. I want to write, so it's weird because I think that is illegible in a way in which it erases me as a writer and allows you to enter the space and you to be that person. I like that kind of illegibility, where it allows you to enter the piece and believe that this is no longer Dwayne talking about himself and his loves and his woes and his joys. But when I say the words that he said, even when I read them to myself, I believe that now I am experiencing a world that I discover anew. Like that's what I'm chasing after.
And you know, you mentioned that poem, Feeling Fucked Up, and the poet, I never met Etheridge Knight, but the poet Eleanor Wilner, who is an amazing person, and she told me a story of going with Etheridge Knight to a women's prison where he read that poem, and the women in the audience said, read it again. And he read it again, and they said, read it again. And for a half an hour, he read that poem over and over and over again because they needed what was in that poem. And they heard something different in it every time. So, I mean, to me, that's also about, like, the realness of repetition, you know, and giving something to people that they can keep within themselves, which I think is also maybe what we hope for what we do.
That's so beautiful. We are getting the Levi
Yeah,
from Sarah.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I wanted to thank our audience in-house, all the people watching us on the interwebs. Thank you to the Whitney for allowing us this beautiful space to commune. Thank you to the Center for Borderlands and Imagination and my partner, Natalie Diaz. Yes. Thank you to Arizona State University, my home institution. Go Sun Devils. Thank you to Sarah for being on top of us and getting us to run a show and the seating chart and making sure that we are all here, leaving reasonably on time, I think. And thank you to Jackie and Elizabeth and Julie and my partner D. Betts. We thank you all for joining us tonight. Really great experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.